I was trying to figure out why I liked the Grateful Dead for years. And the reason I was telling Andy that more often than not, at their shows, I would look out there and people were having a good time. So I liked their music. I wasn't that deeply into it because I didn't know rock and roll that well when I started. But that's why I became a Dead fan, because 40,000 Americans couldn't be wrong.
Wave that flag, wave it wide and high. Summertime color, come and come, my oh my.
Did you do a slate roll slate on that? Okay.
Let's do the toast.
We ready for the toast? Well, I always was in rock and roll bands. After my very first music lesson, I rented a snare drum, and a friend of mine rented a guitar, and we went and we played that right after our first music lessons. And from then on, we just kept playing. And I was very lucky to have a drum teacher who was very hip, you know, a very loose soul, and wasn't interested in teaching you by the book, but more by feeling. And so I didn't learn by rote so much as just by doing it, playing to records. So, and I have a paper out. See, my parents were never rich enough to buy me a drum set. So I would have this paper out, and you know, as all kids, they can ride without having to use their hands, right? You just lean. And so I'd practice my drums on the handlebars, throwing the papers. Oh, that's all I ever used to do. Loved it. I'd get home from the drum lesson, I didn't have a drum set, and I'd take all my mom's pots and pans, I'd lay them all over the damn living room, right? Bam, 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 bam. You know, that's all I ever wanted to do. It's been real good, you know, it's really satisfying when it's working right. It feels good. Drumming is neat because it's movement. It's like you're back there dancing. When it's really working right, all four of your limbs are moving, so it's just like dancing. And so it's a good trip. The music has to all work though, everybody has to be playing good.
How old were you when you were in your band?
Oh, hell. The first real band, I was probably junior high school. How old were you when you were a freshman? Yeah, 13, 12. Something like that, 12, 13. Used to play for all the local school stuff, you know. Never would. They always tried to ask me to join the school band, the regular march band. Would have nothing to do with it. So I always have this belief, and that is that people that learn to play the drums standing up and just using their hands and not using their feet can never really master playing all the instrument, because a drum set isn't just one instrument. It's every drum, every cymbal is a different instrument, you know. And then I was lucky enough, really lucky, to meet Jerry and Phil, who at that time were considerably older than me. You know, when you're like 18, a guy who say is 22, 23 or whatever has that much more influence. And Jerry was teaching in Palo Alto, and Phil was a friend of his who was living in San Francisco. And we all met and started playing together. And I just happened to see this spark of magic in this guy that really flashed me out and said, you know, everybody's laughing at him now, but this guy is really far out. You know, you could see it in him. And he hadn't played rock and roll guitar. At that time, he was more into bluegrass and entertaining like in folk music styles. And we just started playing rock and roll music. And that time I was a rock and roll drummer, because I'd been doing it by then up for about 5 years. And he was just learning, but it all gelled together and we all had good feeling, you know, and that's what kept us going. That's what made it interesting all these years. One thing about drumming is it's quite physical, and if your body gets in bad shape, you just can't last. And we do pretty long concerts, and I like to have stamina for 5 hours. I like to be able to play 5 hours. If I can't play 5 hours, then it's not happening. And if you're not in good shape, you're not feeling good physically, then you can't. Your thoughts just don't come clearly to you. So I like to do stuff. Like 4 years ago, me and a partner of mine had a cattle ranch in Point Reyes. It's over on the coast here. And we ran 200 head of cattle and got kicked and got everything, you know, got hurt and had fun, had bad times, got rained on, did the whole thing. Even broke horses for this guy. Jesus, he had a good hustle going. He'd get these young horses. They were yearlings or maybe a little older, quarter horses. And they weren't broken at all. And he'd get us on to sit on the damn things, right? And they turned the crank on you, you know, and you're going 10 feet in the air. And if we could break him in a week, get him so he could just put a saddle on him, he would make himself $800, or the horse would sell for $400 if he couldn't put the saddle on. So he had this tremendous hustle, and he had these two dumb hippies getting their asses kicked, making all this money for him, right? And we never got paid. But the whole point is, it was just a lot of fun, you know, a lot of exercise. It's good, you know. I like getting down with the earth. You know, you can't fool it. You got to really work with it. It's a challenge. Our light is not dimming on us. There's my dog. Come here, Changes. Changes. You won't even come. The one thing that, you know, that's changing me about this is that brings me down more than anything in the band at all is the travel part of the business, is having to travel from all these places and staying there for a short time and not really knowing people and just seeing audiences as audiences and not as people, you know. And you don't pick up on all the little nuances of each town necessarily, unless you go there a whole lot and like you get to know New York. You know, like I consider New York my second home in a way, my East Coast home. And it's just, that's the only part, the actual flying and hanging out in airplanes. That part is kind of scary. And it's really nice right now to just be able to sit back for a few months and know that you don't have to make an airplane flight and that you feel really good, you got a good place to live. That's all I need. I don't have to worry about the band. Band, I think, will take care of itself when the time feels really good. We'll get together, rehearse new material, probably do another album after Christmas. I hope we do. And this time I hope we find an engineer that we work with real well. I think it was played up as the last concert a lot, you know, but I just think a cooling period of time where we can just find our own ways. Everybody's ideas are quite different now, musically and on all other levels too. So it can only be beneficial to have a time where you can go out and look for new things, you know. And when you're in a band situation where you have to perform so much that you can't, you know, find new avenues, you can't escape into new places, then the band itself isn't going to go anywhere. It's not going to get that much better because you're performing all the time. You don't necessarily have time to learn new material, and you don't have time to, say, experiment with different types of art, films, television, whatever, and you're into the performing thing. So we're just going to let it taper off. I don't see it as a stop at all, because I know that the guys in the band are too tight spiritually to have anything that you could say stop. You know what I mean? You just can't stop something you've done for 10 years and you have this feeling. Even though you don't want to play together for a while, they're still the head together. And that's what I like. That's my own high.
It's far out. It's 35.
I'm always into making these judgments about whether the gig was good or not. You know, like I could come off the stage feeling a certain way. Wow, it felt fucked up, or it felt really great, or it felt, you know, medium, or energetic, or something like that. But different judgments, and I'll make them, and then listen to the tapes, you know, the concert or something like that, and see what actually happened musically, or what notes were played, and it's all different than the way I remembered it. You know, it's like my memory is fucked up, you know, or my ability to judge stuff as it's happening. My personality interferes with what's really happening in terms of my ability to tell what it is. You know,
Yeah.
I can't tell.
That's everybody. Nobody really has that capacity.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. That's the thing about. Yeah, that's a thing you can only learn from something like recording. You know, if there weren't recordings, I would, or at least for me, it would be, you know, I don't know, man. I would have gotten too discouraged to play, I think, or something. It would have been, I would have felt too downed out by the way it feels when it doesn't feel right.
Well, you want to study the mistakes and find out where the holes are?
Well, the mistakes there's a difference between making errors and feeling. You know, if I'm talking about feeling, I sort of mean that that there's an ease of flow. In other words, there's not like a lot of tension in terms of you don't have to struggle for ideas. Those are the kind of nights that get me off, because those are the nights that...
Not struggling for ideas?
Right, because they're flowing, you know what I mean? Struggling for them is a far out thing musically. That's an interesting thing musically, and that's what I'm doing if they're not flowing, you know.
If they're flowing, though, they're flowing, you know, and it's no struggle. It's beautiful.
Well, I view it as one big continuum. I see nothing ending and nothing beginning right now. I've been working at something for the last 10 or 12 years that I'm just continuing to work on. I'm going to start to focus more on a particular aspect, that being my recording career. But it's my music that I've been working on, and I've been, over the past few years, in collaboration with Garcia and Lesh and Billy and Keith. And I expect that now I'll be sort of toning down that relationship, though not ending it, and working on developing myself more, rather than working on developing our group more. If we ever do reconvene for concert tours, it'll be good for the whole group. If I'm a more fully developed individual, everybody has to have time to indulge their own fantasies, to fulfill ideas that they've come up with that they've never had time to get around to, because we've had a full-blown concert schedule year after year after year. I've had one vacation in 10 years now. That was a 2-week vacation that I took in Mexico with John. And aside from that, I've never had a chance to get anywhere and go see anything different. And I think that as a group, the Grateful Dead could be said to have been suffering from a sort of musical inbreeding by never having a chance to really expand. Garcia, I don't know how he does it. I guess he never sleeps, but he manages to get out and play with other people. But I don't consider myself particularly lazy, but I just never get around to it. I'm either working on material for the Grateful Dead, or we're in rehearsal, or we're in the studio, or most of the time we're on the road. And like I say, I've just never had a chance to develop anything that's more particularly myself.
There's another aspect there. If you can imagine trying to create in the presence of somebody who is so much more fully developed than yourself, Garcia and Hunter are probably the best. And it's a little bit like a younger brother having to deal with an older brother who's a tremendous success. Always has been. It's a little intimidating.
Having lived with it for about 10 years, however, it doesn't bother me so much anymore. I've forgotten who came up with the idea originally. It might have been Danny Rifkin, for that matter, but after a particularly grinding tour, which had come on the heels of 3 relatively grinding tours, and it's not that the music wasn't bad, it's not that the music was bad, the music was real good, but just the airports and the hotels and everything, everybody was real down, and we were having a general meeting. And the idea of, why don't we hang this up for a while and take some of the pressure off? I'm getting old. I feel like I'm getting old, was essentially the sentiment that was expressed. And everybody just clamored, and it seemed just like the thing to do. And so that's what we're pursuing now.
After the concert last night, it suddenly occurred to, I guess, a lot of people that maybe it wasn't a year's sabbatical, that maybe this was the end of all that.
Well, it's the end of something.
And
This is hearsay.
well,
This is just
I came to that conclusion, and there was a bit of mourning, but it passed, and it seemed like a nice thing.
In my opinion, this
Because
is
there's no point in being the greatest rock and roll band in the world if it's also a pain in the ass.
Way down to the mountain, I was drinking some wine. Looked at the devil and I saw a body sign. Lit fire across the heaven, painted black and white. Get me there, gonna be a party tonight.
We'd been carrying this great PA around for a number of years, and we already had it down to a science, and it took all day to put it up. You had to get up at 6 a.m. at the hotel. You had to get to the show by 8, crack open the semi-trucks and start unloading the stuff by 10. We had it unloaded onto the stage. Then it took us 2 hours to set it up from 10 to noon. That is, put up the speaker cabinets, and the scaffolding had to be exactly right. If the scaffolding wasn't right, that took a lot longer. But we had that down to a science. And once you start putting it up, then we take a break around noon and take a quick lunch break and start wiring after noon. And by 4 o'clock, we'd have it done. It took about 4 hours to get it up and running after the noon break. And then the band would be in at 4 o'clock, like promptly in those days, and do a sound check until about 6. The doors would open. And 7 would be the show time, and they'd play till about 1 in the morning, and then we'd take it down, took us to about 4 in the morning. So if you see, when we were doing that, it didn't leave enough room for us to really, and we partied for 2 hours after we were done and drove to the next town or got to the next town. You know, it was tough. So we had to leave space for it. It was like bringing a herd of elephants wherever you went. You know, it was a big thing.
The first time I saw it, it was set up in Reno, Nevada at an outdoor gig. And Reno's like this was a high area, and they were very high area. And the wind was blowing really well, and nobody was there yet, and I was standing out looking at this thing, and I was watching that speaker, whatever you want to call it, blowing back and forth. I'm going, I'm going to set my drums under that, you know, and I just went, wow, and that was really scary for me. But they finally cabled it down better, so it didn't have to blow around. But it didn't give you a feeling of confidence to see this thing kind of motioning in the wind.
I mean, you got to remember, it was a standing bass wave for Phil's setup, 32 feet of bass stack, you know, and it sent out a standing bass wave. And we were able to do experiments like that. The very fact that the microphones faced into the speakers was done because Bear came up with this out-of-phase way of putting up the microphones, so the band heard the same source going out in the audience. It was very rare, you know, to have anything like this. And his ideas were to have the monitors be the same source as the PA was. And it was very ahead of its time.
I thought it was absurd, but it made me giggle. You know, it was wretched excess, to be sure, but we were known for that. You know, we try anything. And, you know, it did work for the people on the back rows, I think. I think they got the benefit, the full benefit of that PA. I don't think for anybody else it was better or worse. With one exception, the way we had the microphones, in order to have all the power behind you, you have to have feedback canceling microphones. And the way we did that was we took 2 omnidirectional microphones and put them like this and sang into this one, and then the other one would hear, it was out of phase with this one, so they both heard what was going on behind us, but it was out of phase, so they canceled each other. And only this one was hearing our vocals. But the problem is it didn't sound good.
They had to use phase canceling microphones, which makes the voice sound very much like that, which is not a good thing. Yeah,
it was very hard because, number one, that was back in the days when people had monitors in front of them. And so to get like this little wedge in front of you, you know, to compete against that, or not compete against it, but to blend with it in order for you to feel part of the band and be able to do what you do, it was very hard. A lot of times it was very hard. And like Billy said, the phase canceling microphones, you had to be literally right upon them. And so a lot of times your voice sounded like
tip
this.
of the nose microphone.
Your voice sounded like
shot?
this.
That's a bad shot, I know.
Because it was trying...
It's like I'm picking a winner, you know. Sorry. It's hard to take something that happened to you 10 years ago. What, 10 years ago? Let's back that up. 20 years ago, so seriously.
30.
30? Is it really 30? I was coming in here going 25 if I'm lucky. And look at it, it's 30. Cool.
Going where the wind goes. They never gonna miss us. While I'm singing, I got you in the morning sunshine. Sunshine daydream. Sunshine daydream.
We decided that the sound system and the crew and the whole traveling circus got to be too much to support. And so we just decided, okay, we're going to have to knock off and lick our wounds and see what it's like and sometimes see if we want to try doing this again. It wasn't the music that was suffering. It was just the fact that we couldn't play every, 3 days running, for instance. You had to have a day off between each town, and the huge crew that we had to support. By touring, we were basically just supporting this touring organism that we had made. It was just out of control, out of hand, and that was why we had to knock off. But it wasn't the music that was getting stale. So I always had the feeling that we would get back together at the soonest possible, at the soonest possible time, as soon as the bulk of our crew had found other jobs, so that we didn't have to feel guilty about having laid them off. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, just from looking at the wall of sound, you can figure how taxing that must be to build that thing at each gig. And it was just time. Everybody was just wrung out. Okay, so it was time to take a break at a pure physical level, because that thing, is a very big thing. So that part needed a break, for sure. And I think that we probably surmised at the time that we weren't putting out enough new music to keep us interested. We didn't want to just go back and hammer the whole thing, the old thing. So that was what I would guess.
And from my perspective, I had a year-old little boy who's now 30, Billy. And so we had gone to Europe that year, and I think we were all kind of looking to kind of cool it a little bit and kind of see what came after the cooling process, and what came up and what didn't, and just let things be as they were to be. And of course, what came up was the Grateful Dead was going to still be way around for everybody to enjoy, including us.
Come on, Sparky.
When I watch it now, it's incredible home movies to see us all in our youth, and to see us all in health, and to see everybody at the peak of their craft in the way it was. It's very enjoyable to watch.
Thank you very much. You're a damn good audience.
This was Jerry's baby, and he loved film. One of the things that he and I always talked about was film, because we both loved old movies, and as kids, I think we had insomnia, and we watched a lot of old black and white movies and movies in general. And we went to see movies on the road, and we talked about movies, and this was Jerry's dream, and he was in, as he would have said, I was happy as a pig in shit right now.
He was like going to film school. He was in Film School 101. He had never made a movie before, and it's a tremendous learning process. And so he was just asking questions of people that knew how to make movies. He was trying to learn the art more than asking from his peers that were musicians.
I would watch how Jerry's instinct was so pristine, and he would know exactly what he wanted. He would know how to communicate what he wanted to Susan Crutcher, who was, the main editor there with Jerry. And I've never seen someone who had so many interests, who could not only enjoy and appreciate those interests, but be a part of the process of seeing something come forth that had to do with it. Jerry was incredible like that. And I would watch his eye as he was looking at all the footage, that would be coming across, and he would know what was happening, what wasn't happening, where the energy was, and he would know exactly how to put that into the editing process and make it happen. He was just, as a matter of fact, Jerry told me a couple of times that more than anything else, he was an editor, like overall. And I understood that when I saw him doing that film.
You mean within his music too?
Yeah, in his music too.
Anything he edited.
Anything he did, whether it be art or music or this movie, he was an editor.
Well, I thought that the reportage there was a really good balance. The fans and their dedication, the crew, Bill Graham, the Hells Angels, everybody who was involved. I thought that they were proportionately well represented, and I think it gets across the point. The film gets across the point that it takes everybody to make these events happen. It takes the band, the audience, the crew, everybody there. You have to have everybody there. No one's dispensable. It's a big party, and there everybody pitches in.
It had the good and the bad and the ugly and the out there and the in there and the where is it and here it is, and everything you could think of was in that movie, which was always a part of the Grateful Dead experience, and why people really loved coming to see the Grateful Dead, because it included everything, and you never knew what everything meant for a particular night. And I think I watched the movie maybe 6 months ago or so, and I had that same conclusion. You know, this really did say so much about what the whole Grateful Dead experience was for the audience as well as the musicians.
Yeah. It was a really competent home movie. It really showed as it was. You know.
As it was.
There were no actors involved, nobody had lines. And it was anything but smooth, it was real. So it was embarrassing for me for the first point of view, because it was like that. I was like, oh my gosh, you know. And, oh, here's this movie that's going to follow us around for the rest of our lives. But it turns out to be the truth, and that's cool. So that's how it was then.
And I think that's the cool part about it, was that it was the truth. You know, there were not makeup people and wardrobe people and let's get the lighting right.
We put on more
and
makeup
everything.
here today than we did there.
That,
for sure.
exactly right. So what you saw and what you heard was pure Grateful Dead.
I think they're the only genuine environmental band. There are other good bands that get you into a mood, but I think they're the only band where somebody might walk in to a Dead show, never look at the stage, dance for 9 hours and leave and say goodnight. Never talk to anybody, just dance and nod and relate. I'm not talking about, you know, being stoned. You don't have to be stoned to enjoy it. I'm not stoned. I think the positive example of that is that I'm not a connoisseur of rock and roll, and I don't know it that well, and I don't like it that much. But I'm a Grateful Dead fan, because they make me feel good too. And if you capture that, then you got a movie. If you can't capture it, nobody will ever see this.
Wave that flag, wave it wide and high. Summertime done, come and gone, my oh my. I'm Uncle Sam, that's who I
It was my favorite part of the movie. It blew me away. I really loved it.
Gary Gutierrez was incredible, the job he did on that. You know, he captured that thing. Jerry loved that, and we all loved that.
First, I just loved it, and it spoke to me about Deadheads. It was like the free, easy lifestyle that Deadheads like. You know, that's what I thought. You know, so to me, it was very communicative. It really talked about the lifestyle, like how it was, and especially the guy laying in the swimming pool with his arms back. Guess who that is? I mean, I just said, that's me.
I don't know that we had seen anything like that, you know, that was kind of out there, but yet, you know, had that medium going for it. So I thought it was just really, really cool.
It was hip cartoons. It was like
Hip cartoons.
It was like the paper version of cartoons put on big screen. And the other feeling I had was, how come it can't last longer? I've never done an animation project like this before or since, in that it was sort of completely intuitive, and the technique itself allowed that to happen. You didn't have to draw everything in advance and have all of your ideas then and then go through this process. You could actually do something, try something, that would give you another idea, you could respond to it, and because we had a benefactor who was willing to fund whatever we came up with, we just, he would give us some more money and some more, and we would just keep going. I think the budget on the animation was $25,000, which it may sound like a lot of money, but given that we spent about 7 or 8 months doing this, you know, it's pretty thin with a whole lot of people. It just sort of grew in itself, and it sort of found its length when we had to be definitive about it and nail down the track. By that point, it had grown to 8 minutes length, so it was already quite a bit beyond what was originally anticipated, but we got carried away, you know. In late 1975 or early 1976, I was working at Cordy Films in Mill Valley, California, and we were doing animation for Sesame Street. And one of the editors who came in freelance to put together Sesame Street spots was Susan Crutcher, who, as a freelancer, got the gig to edit the movie and was editing the movie in Mill Valley with Jerry. And she told me that Jerry wanted to do some sort of animation for the movie at the beginning, and invited me to come over and meet Jerry and talk to him and hear what his ideas were. Jerry had sort of a general idea that he wanted to do something with the posters of the period, some sort of kinesthesis or animation of the posters so that they would give them movement and a lot of sort of kinetic energy. So we started off with that idea, collecting a lot of posters, but I was driving back to Northern California from LA listening to US Blues on the radio, and somehow this idea just clicked that it was the bicentennial year. And I remembered that picture of Jerry on the cover of one of the albums where he's wearing a sort of an Uncle Sam-like hat. And so this idea just sort of obvious once you think of it, that we should do something with Uncle Sam as a Grateful Dead skeleton. Once Jerry heard that idea, he just basically said, yeah, that's great, go with it, man. It's just the way he was about everything. He would come over to the studio when we were working just to visit and see what was happening because he was highly interested in it. But all we ever got from him was validation. We never got any criticism or not even suggestions. He gave us sort of a basic theme that we followed, which sort of the thing that we sort of glommed onto was the idea of chance. That things could go this way or that way at any moment in life, and that chance was such a big sort of thematic factor in a lot of the songs and work and so forth. So he gave us that as sort of a thematic element, and putting that together with the iconography of the dead, which was roses and skeletons and Day of the Dead imagery. Good. The Grateful Dead movie offered the perfect opportunity to pull out all the stops and try everything I'd wanted to try. A lot of what we were doing was based on the kind of animation that I had learned at Cordy Films, which was cutout animation, which is animated directly under the camera, as opposed to traditional cell or in a computer. In cutout animation, everything is done under the camera. You prepare all of the artwork elements that you need to work with under the camera, and then you literally sit there for hours and hours at a time, moving any number of kinds of things. In this case, cutouts of Grateful Dead iconography and clip art. The track was created first. In animation, you always create the animation track, or at least the basic audio. You work to the track. Susan Crutcher, the editor on the movie, basically created that, working a little bit with Jerry, I believe. And it was a mix of US blues with various other kind of mood things, and we sort of structured it out basically in sound first. That track is then transcribed to these dope sheets so that every primary accent and every beat would be marked in columns so that you could look down, you know, one page might represent 2 seconds or so. The
The animation stand was a multiplane stand that had like 3 layers, 4 layers of glass that you could stack up. The camera looks down through that glass, so you get a kind of multiplane or sort of quasi-dimensional look. So all things in different levels can move in different directions and so forth. And this is before computers, well, before computerized animation stands anyway. And so everything was mechanical. If you wanted something to move in the background to pan to the right through the frame, you would turn a mechanical, a geared lever to the next increment that you had marked, and that would be one tiny move. And then you would, if there was going to be a zoom at the same time, you would turn that one little increment, and you had a little mechanical counter that showed you what frame you were on. And then under the glass, you would say, if there was an Uncle Sam cutout figure there, you would, it would have had a little bit of spray mount on the back, so it would be tacky and stick to the glass. We would register where the feet were, and I would pull the one cutout away and then put the next one, the next increment of action down in the same registered place, clean the glass, check my dope sheets, and then we'd hit a little thing and click. That would be one increment. And then you'd do it all over again, and every frame would take maybe, if things were going fast and something was simple, it would be maybe a minute between clicks. Often it would be 3 or 4 minutes between clicks. A lot of the animation was much more complex than that. We didn't want to use opticals, which is a way of compositing multiple images onto one in a post-production optical printer. And there was no such thing as digital compositing at the time. So basically, for economy's sake, and because it's what I had learned, we did everything in camera. If something were to glow in the background, or any number of kinds of things that would be going on simultaneously that couldn't all be done in one frame, we would close the shutter of the camera, backwind the magazine to the correct little place on the counter, go back to 0, or whatever frame we were going to, open the shutter, and then relight and do whatever had to be changed for the new setup that's going to go onto the same piece of film. And then we would go through that same process again. Some of the shots in the movie were as many as 16 passes in camera, and it would take us for a 3 or 4 second shot from starting early in the morning and leaving at midnight.
I'm Uncle Sam. How do you do?
Uncle Sam was our sort of hero protagonist, and I knew that we were going to use him throughout and needed to come up with an efficient way of creating that character with a lot of dance moves that would leave some freedom to how we sort of put it together later. So we hired a dancer and rented a tailcoat and top hat, and he wore black leotards, and we took white tape and taped it on the front of his legs, and he wore white gloves. And then we put him in front of a white background with a couple of big tape mark X registrations on the background. Then used a motorized still camera, black and white, to shoot 10-second bursts of action where he would do a specific dance move. He would march across back and forth, or he'd stand in place marching toward camera, or he'd twirl his cane, or whatever the action were. And so we got many, many takes of different kinds of dance moves and so forth. The negatives of those were projected onto sort of heavy paper, traced and painted one at a time, hundreds of these, probably 1,000 of them, by several artists who sort of had a factory process for doing the airbrushing and all of that. One room was just a wall filled with all of these cutouts with various little pieces of movement and so forth. I came up with this idea for the opening, in which there's an image that we used from the Blues for Allah album cover, sort of long-haired violinist. So we cut out that artwork and then did some sort of traditional animation painted cells that would give him the bowing pieces. And I had just had the sort of the pieces of motion, and then I would sort of lay down the appropriate cells to match what I was seeing on the soundtrack. But I wanted to get these kind of screechy, a visual equivalent of the screech that we were hearing on the violin to kind of kick it off. And so I came with this idea of since this was all backlit art, that is, it was lit from behind on a light table, this particular piece of art. Camera's looking down into that light table, backlit art, but between the camera and the art, I put a large piece of glass that had had about an inch of an edge to it to contain the Karo syrup that we poured on top of it, about an inch thick of, inch and a half of Karo syrup, which is, you know, a clear, viscous liquid, and then laid saran wrap on top of that. So in effect, it was a lens, a distortion lens, because...
How'd you come up with the idea of Karo syrup?
I don't know. You could sort of stretch the saran wrap, and because it was in a viscous liquid, it would hold that shape for at least, you know, for a few seconds anyway. And you could click the camera and then distort it another way, and then click, and then another one, and click, and so forth, and then it would break the image up in these sort of scissory ways. During Uncle Sam's motorcycle ride, I wanted something kind of psychedelic happening in the sky, but it had to be something that we could do by our sort of methods that we lived by and developed, and something that would still allow that kind of freedom under the camera to create it, but knowing that I was going to have something sort of psychedelic happening. I wanted a mandala-like image. So I gave a couple of my assistants the project of, actually several of them. There are these Denison adhesive labels that are like little circles of paper with adhesive on the back. We took, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those sheets and airbrushed them all to look like little spheres. So then I could give an animator a stack of these balls and a template, a large field, 16 field animation cell, and a center point and a sort of a concentric circle so that they could arrange these Denison adhesive labels. You could just stick them on in patterns, sort of mandala-like concentric patterns. So I had stacked around every table in the art room were these cycles or little bursts or whatever, anything everybody came up with. And then we sort of figured out an order for them and wrote it up on the dope sheet so we'd hit the accents and the beats. And that's how we created that kind of strange mandala-looking thing. Where Jerry really got more involved was, of course, in the area of sound. When it came time to record sound effects and dub in various things, we spent, I don't know, probably a week at his studio in Marin. The motorcycle sound came from one of the guys' bikes that was parked outside. They went outside and recorded that. They recorded a lot of stuff there in the studio. He had a synthesizer. That voice of the skeleton where he says, "All right, man," or something like that, in this sort of dry, brittle voice, that's actually Jerry's voice with, he put a tube in his mouth that went into a synthesizer. I'm not sure what this is called, some sort of emulator. So he would record Watching Picture, you know, a couple of the little vocalizations of the character. Jerry's sort of basic philosophical direction was that life consists of the unexpected, where things could go this way or that way at any time. I remember him specifically saying that. And pinball was one of those kind of ideas of that sort of grew out of the process of or a game of chance in some ways. I don't know if I could tell you what the whole animation means. I think the fun of it is for people to respond to it. I didn't intellectually think this out and have an agenda. It was just the fun of that it was the bicentennial and there was a lot of this sort of rah-rah patriotic stuff, and in a way it was a way of sort of taking back Uncle Sam for our own countercultural uses. And I don't know exactly how the idea came about, but the notion that Uncle Sam would end up in jail with a whole bunch of other Uncle Sams and the Statue of Liberty would free them, it just seemed right for at the time.
Baby,
the movie itself is a perfect encapsulation of what the Dead were in 1974, which is really, was just truly peak era Grateful Dead. And to have that as a 2.25-hour movie, and then to have all this other contextual stuff, the bonus songs, the documentaries, the interviews, really shows where the Dead were at in 74, and this is it. This is all we have from that era. We have nothing from 72, really. We've got a little bit of a show here and there. Nothing from 73, another peak era year, and then 74, nothing but this. And fortunately, as the vault shows with a 30-foot wall of film, they documented it really well. So then we started digging, what kind of elements do we have? And we realized that we had everything in place to actually do it. Then we said, well, let's build on the momentum of a DVD of the closing of Winterland, and let's follow it up a year later in the fall of 2004 with the Grateful Dead movie DVD. So what we've done is spent about a year just making sure we can do it and do it right. There was really no point in just, doing a mediocre release of it. It wasn't worth doing unless we could find original negative print material, both the 16mm, the 35mm, original multi-track audio, and it turns out we had everything we needed and quite a bit more. So we went through performance-wise and really selected about 15, 20 songs based on performance from the 5-night run that didn't make it into the Grateful Dead movie. And we said, let's focus on these, and then once we've determined based on performance what we want, let's go down and see if we have film elements for them, and then let's see if we have the audio elements. Let's make sure we can do it. So we went through, we found about 15 songs, and of those 15, 8 or 9 of them we had the film elements for. So we got our whole list. Then we based it on, did we have the material? Based on work print, which is kind of a 16mm, a rough copy that you can watch, you can scratch, you can throw it on the ground and get it dirty if you know you have the negative. And we did have a good idea that the negative resided at another vault we have in Los Angeles. Uncle John's Band, Sugary, these were songs that were slated to be in the original Grateful Dead movie, and at the last round of cuts from a 5-hour film down to a 2.25-hour film, these songs, the other one, The Dark Star, these were slated to be in there. So now they're finally where they should be. They had 6 camera people on stage or filming the action on stage, and each camera person was essentially assigned one spot for the 5 nights. And so we have Pop, and he's centered about 40, 50 feet out from the stage on a little podium, and that's the wide-angle shot you'll see a lot, maybe at the beginning of a song, maybe when the band is doing something quite dynamic and you want to see all 3 or 4 people at once doing something, maybe the 2 guitars, bass, drums, a nice wide shot of that, maybe get Keith in there. So that would be Pop. Then on stage we had several camera people, and specifically Lenzer, Don Lenzer, a Bay Area guy, and Keating. They were the handheld guys over on Jerry's side. So most of these really nice tight close-up shots you see at Jerry are either Lenzer or Keating, and specifically the real close-ups on Jerry, either singing or the low-angle shots of maybe him playing. You can see the guitar and his face. Those would be Don Lenzer's shots, and then Keating was a similar angle, but he had the zoom where he could open up a lot more and get Jerry in focus, and then Bobby, and then Phil, and he could really rack focus. And as Bobby was singing, and he could do some great things. So Keating and Lenzer were that side. Then we had Lighthill and Myers, and they were focused on the Billy, Phil, and Keith angles. So any shots you see from Phil's side, or those close-ups of Billy, or a nice shot of Keith with the crowd behind him, those would be handheld shots by Lighthill and Myers, who were kind of roaming that side of the stage shooting. And then the world-renowned Albert Maysles, he was, for 2 of the nights, 3 of the nights maybe, he was walking around that side too, just shooting a lot of great stuff. During the Grateful Dead movie, when you see these people dancing during the piece right before Morning Dew, the big space jam, that would be Albert Maysles' shot. We had Else up in the rafters, where you get this beautiful high-angle shot looking down over the band with the crowd beyond them. So they kind of had, 6 or 7 main camera people and then some rovers. We had Primes, who ran the crane. So all these wonderful crane shots you see, that was Primes up there for all 5 nights. A few of us who have watched it on the Steenbeck for a while and then involved in the transfer have been looking at it for 6 months, just excited for it to get out to the world. So this is the exciting part, that people are going to see this 90 minutes of bonus songs. And I think we have plenty more for, another release down the road. But for now, this is quite a project.
Mainly mixing the sound, mixing the surround sound and then also the stereo sound for the movie and then for the bonus material. And we're including Jerry's original mix on the movie just because, well, the fact that it's the original authorized mix that he did, and it was a theatrical release set up for the movie. It has a sound, it has a unique sound to it. And I'm sort of taking a different approach, doing it because we want to make sure the bonus material that we're doing and the movie have some kind of continuity sound-wise. So that's why I'm doing the whole thing, and to give everybody sort of an alternate idea of what it could sound like.
That's who I am.
When I say Jerry's mix, it was really Dan Healy mixing and then Jerry approving. They had some real concepts, some very technical, on why they did what they did. There's a lot of kind of delay sounds with the idea so that wherever you were in the theater, because again, this is for a theater presentation, the idea of being in the home didn't even exist. So for the theater, they wanted everyone to be able to hear all instruments from wherever you were in the house, in the theater. And so they had a real concept of what they were doing. Now, it's not the same at home. So kind of it's going to be unique for people who've never heard it. It's just you'll hear your front wall, and then there's a lot of kind of delays, things kind of moving around. It's cool. One of the first things in listening to the overall mixes was, could we remix this movie, because there's elements that are interviews and sound effects and special things that we didn't have the source tapes for. They've evaporated someplace. So in listening to Jerry's mixes, we realized that all that material, 99% of that, is on the center channel. And so by using the center channel, the original one, we could build our mixes around that. And we could take the source tapes that we have that are 16 track and remix it and create something pretty special. There are sounds that really need to be cleaned up. Bobby's guitar has a number of crackles, and that's what I'm working on right now, trying to take these crackles away. When you watch the movie, you'll see there's a unique mic setup, and it's called a differential mic. It's a setup so that the band could have their wall of sound, and behind the band is this immense volume of music, but the microphone is set up so that it'll only pick up the vocal that's sitting right close to it. It cancels everything else out. The drawback to it is that it's pretty thin sounding. There's no real chesty sound to voices, and I'm sure if anyone has heard maybe a tape of the movie, they'll notice that. So I'm trying to deal with that, and just kind of the vocal quality, the sound of it is not great. There's kind of a smeary sound that I'm trying to deal with so that it cleans up a little bit. Again, instruments, the bass drum, Billy's bass drum doesn't sound very good, and so I'm working on that, and kind of trying to add some body to it so that it's fills in the bottom of the whole project. You know, you got to have that kick, and you got to feel pretty good, that and the bass.
Can you show us what you're doing with it?
Yeah, well, that's something I am working on right now. Is this bass drum. So what I could play for you is the bass drum, and I'll back up a tiny bit, and that is we transferred each of the songs into a digital workstation, so that number one, it's a very high resolution workstation so that it sounds like the original, doesn't degrade it or as much as possible. And it allows me to do some things like clean up some of these tracks that I couldn't do before. But in any case, so I have, and when I'm playing that off the computer, it doesn't degrade. An analog tape, if you roll it over and over again, pretty soon it's getting a little dull and loses high end. At least with digital, once it's in there, it's not going to change sound. So anyway, what I started off with is Billy's bass drum. And I take a listen, and it's not very exciting. It's pretty kind of thin. It's like this little ticky-tacky noise. So I can do some things that I have some equipment, and I do some equalization, which is add some tone and compression, which helps control the dynamics. And so I've got those set up over there, and so by pushing an insert, I can get that. Let me try that one more time. I can't even see. Okay, by adding my insert, I bring that equipment in and it helps, you know, modify this a little bit. And then the other thing I'm doing that I don't usually do with a bass drum is I send it to another amplifier and a speaker and change the tone on that speaker and to add a little bottom. And so that's what I've done here. I've already recorded it on the track, and then I can kind of bring it in so I can add some bottom into it, make it a little bit more, sound a little bit more like a bass drum instead of this little ticky-tacky thing. So we went from this sound, and then actually we started from there, and then we made it more like that. And then I'll kind of, when I go to mix, I'll add those two to taste, sort of help it out, kind of see how it kind of fits together with the bass. I'll take an instrument and send it back out and reamp it. In other words, send it off the tape machine back out into the studio, into an amplifier, and mic that and record it again. And the reason I do it, and I'll do it with an amp that is either one of Jerry's original amps or something that really sounds really good for Jerry. I'm doing that to make a bigger instrument. Now I have the original guitar in one channel, I re-record it and have it again on another channel. So I have two channels of it that don't exactly sound the same. The tonal quality of each amplifier is slightly different, and then I can take that and make it a wider instrument. I like doing that for a surround project. The band's on stage. In this case, it's a small band that only one song does Mickey play on. Most of it is just one drummer, so it's one drummer, two guitar players, bass and piano, and it allows me to kind of put you in the middle of the band. And so the guitar can be over on one side of the surround and the keyboard over the other side to kind of emulate where they are on the stage. And the reamping, to me, really helps create this bigger thing. I don't know what their setup was. I know that, again, they had two 16 tracks for overlap, so that because a tape begins to run out, and they recorded it at a high speed, the highest quality they could at the time, which was very good. So they had two machines. As it got to the end of one tape, near the end, they'd push record on the next machine, which was fed exactly the same stuff, and then they'd have an overlap so that later they could cut the two together seamlessly, and that's what I've done too. I really enjoy the mixing part of it. I'm currently in the middle of the pre-production, the getting everything cleaned up. Like I said, the vocals that are really a problem that I have to work on each little problem. The sound, the instruments. When I do this reamping, I want to make sure that, say, Bobby's guitar is crackle free, so that I don't reamp crackles. Okay, so that's kind of just taking each tune and listening to the tracks on each tune and cleaning them up. It's very non-musical in the sense of putting it together. The fun thing is, once that's done, getting the tones right and then mixing everything together. It's funny because it's on a multi-track, which I use that term real freely, which means that each track has got a different instrument, or in the case of the drums, there's 3 or 4 tracks per the instrument. But that means they're also separate. They have to be added together with reverb or some, with something that makes it sound like that it was never divided in the first place. I want to make it sound like a performance. I want to make it sound like you were there.